Apologies from Barbara, who's ill, Pam Cummings, who's ill, Paul, who can't drive because he's broken his wrist, I think today, this morning, yeah. Kathy Wells and Tom Wells, might be floods that are hindering them. Those of you who I've received, have we got anybody else who's not here? Yeah. Just for declaration of Curian and interests. It's not my hearing aids that are making these play up, is it? Right, okay. I might take these out in a minute because it's not helping me. Has anybody? No, thank you. Confirmation of previous minutes. Anybody got any comments on them? Thank you. So, could I have a proposer, please? And a Peter, and the seconder, Leslie. And those in favour? Any against? Abstentions? So, 3 abstentions from absence of that meeting. You're allowed to vote, even if you weren't here, strangely enough. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's weird. I always thought that was really weird. Chair's announcements. My apologies first, because I missed the site meeting. I went to the wrong place. It's because Daniel hasn't sorted out the postcodes in his areas. So I was sat at the end of this lane, getting colder and colder, wondering where everybody was when I made the effort to get there. And when I got back home and searched diligently in Google Earth and things, I worked out where it was, so I went and had a quick look anyway. So my apologies. Hang on. No, it's my son who's, I haven't spoken to about 3 weeks since Christmas Day, I don't think, but Boxing Day. Never mind, I'll turn it off. Right, so my apologies for that. Officers, for those, I think we all know everybody, but I'm going to say it anyway. Simon, at far left side, who decided to give certain people 2 trips to the meeting, meeting. Anna, who's going to present the case today. Janie, who escaped court yesterday. Bronwyn, who I didn't realise till today has got a twin, and we're assured that it's the other one who's the evil one. Don't know which one. Right. There are no consultees today, and that is it, I think. I wish everybody a happy new year now and hope you all had a good Christmas. Update report, there was one. I hope everybody saw it. It was out yesterday. It was only regarding the rights of way, I think. So, yeah, got to be good. So we'll go straight on to the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to garden land at a property called Oratava off Bell Lane at Broadheath Common in the locality of Lower Broadheath. The proposal is for permission in principle for a single dwelling. The application site is a brownfield site outside of the defined development boundary for Lower Broadheath, which is approximately 1.2 kilometres to the north. But the local area includes a couple of facilities such as the community store and post office and the Dewdrop Inn. Oratava benefits from a large garden area, and the application site would occupy a small section of this, accessed off an existing gated entrance into the rear garden area, served by an access track which also serves Elm Cottage, which is a neighbouring property. You can see from the aerial photograph that the site is currently laid to lawn with a number of mature trees about the wider site. The location plan is the public right-of-way demarcated in yellow. Hopefully you can see that, and you can see it runs the full length of the access track. And you can see the full boundary for Oratava in blue as well. Apologies. An illustrative site plan has been provided to show how a dwelling might be located within the site, but obviously as this is a permission in principle. This is for illustrative purposes only and is a real consideration in this application. Turning to the photographs, this is a view of the site from the gated access to the rear garden. A view of the access track taken from Bell Lane. This is the host dwelling, and you can probably just make out the application site in the background behind the goalposts and evergreen trees that are situated there. Just a view along Bell Lane, looking past a neighbouring property, Moorcroft, which is a relatively newly constructed dwelling towards the site access. And then this is looking in the opposite direction, down Bell Lane. Across from the site is Broadheath Common. And just lastly, a photograph just giving an illustrative illustration of some properties along Bell Lane. The officer recommendation for approval of this application, an application for permission in principle is an alternative way of obtaining planning permission for housing-led development. The process separates the issues concerning the principle of the proposed development from its technical details. The process has two stages: the permission in principle, which establishes whether the site is suitable for housing, and then the second stage, which is known as the technical details consent, where all of the detail matters are considered. When assessing applications for permission in principle, it's limited. Apologies. The limitations for the considerations are site location, type or land use, and amount of development. Only those issues are relevant and could be assessed at this point in time. All other matters such as access, drainage, character, neighbour impacts, and so on and so forth would all be considered at technical details consent stage and are not part of the material considerations. The site is part of a residential garden such that the land use is considered to be acceptable, being residential to residential, and as set out in your officer's report, it's considered that the low density of 10 dwellings per hectare is appropriate to the area, having regard to the surrounding density of development. Therefore, the main issue is the site location. So I've drawn up a little slide just giving a bit of an illustration of other developments and planning permissions we've had in the area in about the last 12 months. The yellow circle is the application site. And as you can see, it's not within a protected area such as a significant gap, which is where this green spotted area is. It's not within a conservation area, it's not within a national landscape or designated wildlife site. It's outside of the development boundary for Lower Broadheath, but as has been confirmed in other recent planning decisions and appeal decisions, there are some services and facilities within a reasonable walking distance, and the locality is only a short distance from the larger services and facilities of Worcester City. These orange stars to the northeast are two individual infill plots that have been approved in the last 12 months, each one dwelling. And then you can see down here to the southeast, this was a recent appeal that was allowed for a permission in principle for 4 dwellings, which has been referenced in your officer's report. In this instance, the site was in the significant gap, but the inspector felt that, I think in part because it's a brownfield site and because of the sustainability of the location, there wasn't any sufficient harm identified to warrant refusal and allowed the appeal. I've also highlighted another application up in the northeast part, which was for 3 dwellings, which was recently refused. And I just wanted to highlight that the reasons for refusal of that application were due to it being within the significant gap and due to it being an encroachment into the open countryside and not following the pattern of development in the area. And you can see the difference between this site here and the other sites where permission has been granted, which are clearly sort of small infill plots. And I'd say that is much more similar to the application we're looking at today. So in terms of the reasons for refusal of the plot to the northeast, none of those factors apply in this instance. And the NPPF at paragraph 11D makes it clear that where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, we should grant permission unless either the application of policies in the NPPF that protect areas or assets of particular importance provides a strong reason for refusing the development proposed. And as already discussed, the site's not within a protected area or close to any asset of particular importance that would be impacted. Or number two, any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the NPPF taken as a whole. Your officers consider that only very limited harm, if any, has been identified in this instance by reason of the location of the site outside of the settlement boundary. And this factor in isolation would not, in officers' view, significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of the proposal in the context of not being able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply and an affordable housing shortfall. At worst, it's felt that the impact is likely neutral. And for these reasons and the reasons set out within your officer's report, the recommendation is for approval of this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anna. That's very clear. Councillor Walton, if nobody else to speak, you're on.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Anna, for that. Was all really, really helpful. Thanks. Just on, while that's on, I'll just pick up on those two properties. The bottom one, Homestead, the 4, that we rightfully turned that down, and obviously it went to appeal and it was given, but it was a strange one in the sense of when you read the appeal decision, it agreed with pretty much every reason we'd given for turning it down, but then ultimately gave it based on the fact that we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply. So that is a kind of a trickier one. The one above it was replacing a bungalow to a larger house and then building a house on the side of it, and that development's not started as yet. So I think the context's really useful, but I think it's probably slightly different to the one that we're discussing. I'm going to go into my script now. Thank you. So I'm going to try and keep this quite. No, I've got notes, of course I have, yeah. But I think it's an interesting application because it's a planning in principle, and we are starting to get a few of these through now. So on the front of the report, it says that we should have regard to site location, as Anna's just said, and the type of land use. So it's on that basis that I've had enough concern or at least want to have a discussion about this application to committee to hear other people's views. This is not a replacement development or an extension to an existing development in open countryside, and it's in open countryside. It is, as we've seen, a proposal of a new house. There were similar applications for development on this land turned down in both a long time ago in 1983 and in 2020. And in the report, it clearly says that policy SWDP2C states that in an open countryside development will be strictly controlled and limited, as I think we all know, to dwellings for rural workers, employment development in rural areas, rural exception sites, buildings for agricultural and forestry, replacement dwellings, house extensions, replacement buildings, renewable energy projects, and development specifically permitted by other SWDP policies. In this case, none of the exceptions apply, and therefore the proposal would not comply with SWDP2C or paragraph framework. As such, if a planning application were to be submitted for the development, it would be difficult to see it being approved. I obviously don't want to waste anybody's time in just saying that we should just accept the recommendation without discussion if there is an impression that actually we then get an application through which has then got no chance of being approved because it doesn't comply to things that it does need to comply to. You'll see that representations made by the Parish Council and others suggest the same, that this contravenes to SWDP2 and it does not come with SWDP 18. Paragraph 4 of the reason justification to SWDP2 states that the high quality of the open countryside is an important planning attribute of the area. The MPPF at paragraph 187 also stresses the need to recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, which this undoubtedly does. And I'd take Anna's point, the fact that over on that side you can see it's a lot more open, but actually what you don't see off that side is it goes to complete openness, Anchordine Hill, and kind of on its way to I suppose Cotheridge one way and Martley the other way is really, really open. So that is undoubtedly an encroachment onto open countryside. In terms of requirements of properties that have been built in the area, and this might not need to be recovered under a planning principle, but we have got 2,500 properties being built as part of SWDP in Lower Broadheath, and so the settlement itself certainly doesn't have requirements for properties. We've got a good supply coming through at the moment. My second point is access to the land, and this is a slightly complicated issue, but one that's worth raising because it's one that I get as a bit of a flea in my ear on a very regular basis. Everybody really aware, and there's a picture showing the common or Broadheath, which everyone will be aware of. If you drive up Bell Lane, you can see it on your right-hand side. But actually the common, there it is, big lump of grass. But opposite there is a verge which runs the entirety of Bell Lane. And that actually, you can see bits of it there. You can see, that's all right. You can see, yeah. So on the left-hand side, you can see, and that hedge there is encroaching it. And one of the big issues is that there's an historical issue, is that landowners have been taking bits of the verge out, but it's actually part of the common. You should really be able to walk up and down that side of the road on the common, but people have taken it over. You'll see that certain places there are driveways, and how that's come to be is that the landowner, Keith Stokes-Smith, who's referred to as the Lord of the Manor because he owns a common, he owns land in other places as well, has given what's called easements on areas of land where people have approached him in order to build properties. In this particular case, Keith has stated, and I know it's on board as well, that he hasn't given permission for access for a new home to be made. So there is access to the existing properties, but he is not currently happy and hasn't been approached to discuss about access to a new property. Real key thing, because at the moment we are getting people putting applications in, and we see where there has been building on there, they have spoken about access and that's been given. So that's something that's recognised within the village, and I think a really important point. So that's under the company's called Manorial Heritage, which Keith runs. So finally, my third and final point, which again, sorry, Anna, may not go in line with planning in principle, but it also goes against SWDP4 as there's no sustainable travel choice from this location. There is no footpath and there is no public transport. It would be possible, ironically, to walk up the side of the road had people not taken, chunks out of that. And it is potentially possible to walk over and walk on the common to walk up, but it's still quite a distance to do that. And there's no access for things like bikes and stuff as well. So there's no immediate pedestrian footway, access to the site. However, there's obviously level access across to Lower Broadheath, which is classed as a Category 1 settlement with obviously 2 good pubs, village shop, and other facilities. So in summary, to try to be quick, it's not compliant with SWDP 2 or 4. There's no agreement with the landowner about access to the site to build a second home. I'd like to hear other people's views about these observations, and particularly about being planning in principle. If we're saying that actually these things, based on what Anna stated at the beginning, are reasons that a building shouldn't be built in this particular location, then I kind of find it difficult as to why there would be an acceptance of that in order for them to the technical element if it doesn't comply with the first basics of it. So that's what I'd just like to open up to discussion. Thank you.
Councillor Wilmot.
Thank you. Just to make it worthwhile making two visits. But no, if we take that photograph there, Anna's highlighted applications that were successful in the last 12 months. Am I right in thinking that when you go down there to the crossroads on the right-hand side, there's been a house built in the garden as an infill on that crossroads?
So Moorcroft which is the one you're referring to, is that sort of relatively new one, which just have the side view of it just there, is adjacent to, is the neighbouring property. And then obviously we've got the 2 permissions where those 2 stars are on infill plots there. I think you said one was a replacement, but the other one I dealt with earlier this year was not.
Yes, but this is actually on the crossroads. That's another house in the garden. Yes, thank you.
Just to say that the access was requested to that, so that's where there is a difference in terms of there was request to access to that property.
I think we're not, as I understand, part of what we're dealing with on this occasion.
And I think that's probably part of the confusion in the sense of we're deciding whether a development in principle can be accepted, but whether it can be accessed or not isn't important, which seems a bit strange.
I think we all find it a
Yeah.
little bit strange.
Permission in principle is literally limited to location, amount, and land use. If, when we get to the technical detail stage, they can't provide suitable access, they can't provide suitable flood risk, whatever the issue may be, we can then refuse, and that's what inspectors are saying in their appeal decisions. We don't have a test bunny for that as of yet. We've had some technical details come in, but we haven't had an appeal as far as I'm aware in this authority. But that is the nature of how this works. It's slightly different to an outline permission where you would be considering a little bit more than just the principle, but this is literally, is this an okay location, disregarding all the technical matters for development.
Councillor Watley.
Thank you, Chair. Anna's actually addressed the first of 2 questions I had, which was exactly what you've just responded to. Thank you for that. If I can refer us to the map that you've produced there, which is very helpful, and my apologies that I couldn't make the site visit. Taking the yellow dot, the location in question, what are the structures shown on the map there to the north and northwest of the yellow blob?
Anything with a blue spot is usually a property address. In this case, as far as I'm aware, they're all residential.
Thank you. So basically we have a plot of land here which is already surrounded by dwellings. Thank you.
So yeah, just to clarify what I said about regarding the access is not something we have to contend with at all, and I take it that's just a conversation between the applicants and the landowner, and it is down to them to arrange suitable access or gain an easement.
I believe you can force it. Is it true you can force an easement? So if you want one, there's a sort of set amount you can pay onto a common or something.
I wouldn't know. That's not a planning
No.
matter. The matter of the easement is not a planning matter anyway. So even if this was a full application, we'd still be telling you to disregard that particular aspect and that comment because it's not material. That is for the relevant landowners to come to a private agreement about, and is not for us to consider anyway.
Councillor Harrison.
Just a quick question, if I can. I had a feeling that it may be not in the SWDP, but in the SWDPR, because I'm going backwards and forwards and getting confused like you would, that there was some limitation about building in back gardens.
I'd have to refer to the relevant document to confirm, but I could do so if you give me a moment.
Sorry, I'd hate to approve this and find that, you know, sort of thing, it's SWDP says you can't build in back gardens or SWDP.
I'm pretty certain that there's no specific thing in the SWDP that says that, because we don't have any very specific policies to that end. As far as I'm aware, I've quoted the whole of SWDP 2 within my reports. I can double check that. But then,
Is it down to overdevelopment?
It was national legislation, there was, yeah. Councillor Godwin.
Principle for this fairly large garden to the rear of the house. If they got planning in principle passed for this, what's to stop them coming back and say, right, now we want planning in principle for 4 houses on that garden because it's big enough for 4, you know, and develop the site out properly. Nothing at all.
yep, there's nothing that would prevent anybody from applying for anything anywhere really. You can make that application.
Yeah, I'm worried about the old sort of stalking horse syndrome. You know, we'll test it just to see how far we go with it this, and then we come back with a full shed load.
I think members need to be cautious of only considering the application that's before them. There are, you know, many possibilities and permutations of what could follow a permission, and one shouldn't make a decision based upon what might happen in the future. You just have to look at this application on its merits.
So is planning to the site if it was passed? Thank you, Bromley. You're very good. I mean,
I think
Sorry.
I think I clarify that would be the reasons for approving this scheme, if members were minded to, that would set the precedent, if there was a precedent to be set. The reasons that apply to this scheme could equally apply to another for the same type of development. So it would be inconsistent to a different conclusion. But of course, the more development you have, that does raise other issues, you know, because of the quantum of development that perhaps isn't raised by but the type of use is, you know, something that would probably set a precedent.
I'm going to come to me first. I'm totally conflicted on this one because I read the report and the pre-app basically turned it down, said go away. And I could see why, and it was totally consistent with their policies to say that. We get to the actual recommendation, and I can see Anna's reasons for recommending approval. And at the same time, I would look at that site, and I would think normally, if this was being brought to this site, Daniel would be bringing it to us because he wanted it approved, and it was against our policies, and we'd be struggling to find a way to let it happen. I mean, because of some local connection or something, we didn't want somebody not to be able to look after their granddad or something important like that. And Simon would be desperately trying to tell us not to do it, and then perhaps facilitating us to do it. And that's a reality of the situations we've ever had. I also look at all these other ones that Anna's pointing out, and I'm getting very worried. Because what's almost the point of us having a policy that says you can't build outside areas? If we do decide that this is, I mean, if you're saying it's a suitable location, any piece of land is a suitable location to put a house on, to be honest. I mean, I can think of a beautiful site. If you go out that, go past that house, turn right, go along that way, turn left there, go down to Broadus almost. There's a field there, they used to have a pony club on, and I thought, if I had a house here, it's the most beautiful location you could ever have. So any plot of land is a suitable location to put a house. So the when it comes down to it. But the unsuitability in this, to my mind, if there is one, is because it's against their policy to build an open outside a village boundary in open countryside, which by definition by our definition, this is. So I still don't know where I am, I'm afraid.
Thanks. I thought I should clarify because there's a danger we're drifting towards relying on SWDP2 for determining this application, which would be at odds with where we are in terms of our position in terms of 5-year supply, because the framework requires that where we're in that position, that we should be determining applications on the basis of paragraph 11D work. I'll just repeat that again. That requires that decision takers, which is me, should be proposals that accord with for this intent means where there are no relevant development plan policies, or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date. It's SWDP2, it's out of date, that we should grant planning permission unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in the framework taken as a whole. So if there are reasons for refusing this application, we need to know what the adverse impacts are. That can't be just simply that it's outside the settlement boundary as defined in SWDP2, because that is no longer the basis for making the decision. There may be similar circumstances which apply to development outside a settlement boundary that might lead one to conclude that it's not a sustainable location, but one needs to be specific about the harm or why something isn't sustainable, not rely on a line drawn on a plan. We've moved beyond that because of our 5-year supply situation. So it's very important to appreciate that differential.
Thank you for that clarification.
And also to just say that there's been reference to the pre-application advice given in 2020, and obviously that was at a point where SWDP2 was in date, and we did have a 5-year housing land supply, which is set out in that response. So that's the difference. That's why we're looking at it slightly differently at this point in time.
Right. So has anybody anything new to add? In that case, Daniel, do you want to make a recommendation?
Yeah, before I do, I was going to say a couple of things. Obviously, in the style of Davros from Doctor Who. Is my voice? It's okay, isn't it? But I mean, on the open countryside thing, and this is obviously coming back to the planning in principle issue, is that under the D in for one dwelling approved on Grange Lane there, that's kind of the last house, and there isn't anything else. So this is definitely taken into open countryside. But I take everybody's points in regards to that's not necessarily relevant for this. It does, to me, at least personally, bring into question what's the point of planning in principle, because if that isn't an issue now, then it doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's suddenly an issue when it comes to the technical side of it, if we're talking about the positioning of houses. So I think that is an issue for me. However, the point of committees is to come and listen to what everybody says and come to a conclusion. I brought this here because I was concerned about things I think we should always be rightfully concerned about when we're councillors in villages. And but having listened to everybody, I've listened particularly to what Anna and Simon have said as well. I'd be minded now to go with what officer's recommendation and approve this application.
Can I clarify something? Is it where as a building in the grounds of an existing dwelling, does that count as open countryside? Or I would have thought that once if you're building in a garden, it can't be an open countryside. I'd just like to clarify that point.
So the sites in the rural area, so by definition, outside of the development boundary, it's defined as open countryside. But it is outside the settlement boundary, so technically it's classed as open countryside. But it's also a brownfield site because it's garden land, so that also provides part of the balanced.
I'm going to formally, from the chair, second this. I'm still conflicted, but I'm going to second it because I agree with Daniel's remarks, but generally, even if he disputes mine sometimes. So we'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. All those in favour of the motion to approve the application in line with officer's recommendation, please raise your voting cards. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That is unanimous, I believe. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. No, I think nothing else, it's been an education for us this evening. I think it's been quite one of our most interesting ones in many ways. Thank you to both our officers for their patience with us, and have a safe journey back. Leslie, could I